Hello and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Audrey Pitcher here today with Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz from the 81st Assembly District in the Bronx. Assemblyman, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Now, we are deep into budget negotiations. We have heard from the Speaker that we are going to have an on-time budget this year, but we're still working on ironing out exactly what's going to be in the final budget. I know one thing that has been talked about a lot is the desire to make sure that there's a limited, or at least as little as possible, policy going into the budget rather than just financial allocations. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes. So typically, the governor, whoever that may be at a given time, likes to get policy issues resolved in the budget because the budget is when the governor has the greatest leverage. And after the budget, then it's kind of like power shifts more towards the legislature. So typically, the governor would make various big proposals in the budget, sometimes springing them on the legislature very close to the end. So, for example, this year, one of the changes the governor wants to do concerns criminal justice. It's discovery, what's known as discovery. And she would like to, I don't want to say tweak, but change the discovery law because so many cases are being dismissed, and the number of dismissals has gone up since the reforms to discovery. And discovery, for those who don't know, is basically the turning over of evidence. So the dismissal rates are high, and so many would agree that something should be done. And the question is what? How radical a change should be or how modest? I mean, depending, and that's something that would be negotiated. I personally don't have a problem with making changes as long as they're reasonable changes. One thing we don't want are cases thrown out or evidence thrown out based upon highly technical and relatively meaningless omissions in discovery, things that don't really prejudice the case. And if we can make some changes like that, that would ensure a fairer process and probably avoid some of the high rates of dismissal. But so what the Assembly and the Senate do is we put forth a budget resolution. We call it a one-house budget resolution. And the Assembly has taken the position that we shouldn't be doing a lot of policy in the budget. The budget's about dollars and cents after all. So in our one-house budget resolution, we had very little of that, if any. The Senate, on the other hand, had a lot of that. So the two houses take a different approach on that. So right now, the negotiations on the budget are mostly centered on these policy issues, and the money issues probably won't be resolved until the policy issues are resolved. And there are a few big key areas. One is discovery. A second is the issue of involuntary confinement. I mean, basically, the move to get people off the streets, homeless people who may be seriously mentally ill because there's a significant amount of violent crime that's been committed. And the question is how to do that. And of course, there are always two sides. One side, which civil libertarians would say, well, you just can't scoop people up and lock them up and all that. But others would say, well, we have to find a way to get some of the people off the streets. I guess I would fall in the middle. I think we do have to get some people off the streets, but we have to be very cognizant of people's rights, and we don't want to deprive people of their rights. But at the same time, we don't want to deprive the rest of the city of their rights to go around safely. So that's a key issue. And another issue concerns masking. And I know we've discussed this before, and what's being discussed is essentially my bill that would place some limitations on masking in certain circumstances. I think, as we know, in the past year and a half, it's become a serious issue because there are some people out there who wear masks. I'm not talking about the masks people wear for health reasons, N95s, surgical masks, whatever. I was one of the strongest advocates of masking during the pandemic, but rather the type of masks that fully cover people's faces and heads. And who wears those? Well, in my opinion, people who are up to no good wear those. So we have some of the less law-abiding people who've been protesting on the Middle East, for example. Not every one of them is doing something wrong, obviously, but some of them are, and some of them are harassing people and worse. You have the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys, which some of the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, and they'll often wear ski masks. So it's a serious issue, and people from both ends of the political spectrum engage in these abuses. And of course, one particular community, namely the Jewish community, has felt targeted because of it's so strange, the world we're living in, where it's 1,200 people are slaughtered, and then the people who support Israel are the targets of this masked harassment that's been going on. So I'm hoping that we can pass something in the budget that at least addresses the situation. People aren't going to be, if it passes, people aren't going to be, rounded up and put in jail or anything like that, but it'll be another tool to address sometimes egregious situations. Now, will that be part of the budget? I don't know. People have different opinions on it. Some people think, have suddenly become big advocates for wearing masks for health reasons, even though they weren't necessarily such advocates prior to this. So we'll see. And some people have legitimate concerns about health, though. I mean, that certainly exists. And the legislation regarding limitations of masks has a lot of carve-outs, a lot of exemptions. So, for example, if you're wearing a mask for health reasons, then there's nothing wrong with that. Religious reasons, as part of a costume, say on Halloween, part of your job, maybe you're a welder. So there are a number of exemptions to that. And and basically you're not going to be arrested simply for wearing a mask. That's just not what the legislation would do. But if you're covering your face and you engage in some form of harassment or intimidation, then you may have a problem. And after all, why do many of the people out there who are covering their entire face except their eyes and their head and everything, why do they wear masks? The same reasons, in my opinion, why some people in the past wore white hoods. It's to cover their face, to conceal their identity, and to intimidate. And that's what that's all about. So we have those issues to resolve, and then we got to deal with the money issues. One issue which some people have contacted my office about is a proposal to, and I think most people are not aware of this, to I guess stretch out money that the city has to pay into the pension system over a greater number of years, meaning they would have to spend less each year, but in the long run they'd have to spend more. And some people have voiced a concern that that'll affect the integrity of the pension system. I've been assured it won't. I don't believe it will, but and people are being some people are spreading fear on this issue, which often happens. But nonetheless, I think it's probably a bad idea, and I'm going to work towards making sure that's not in the final budget. But there are hundreds of money-related issues in the budget, and we have to get all that done in just a few days.
Absolutely. So there is definitely a lot to accomplish before the budget is finalized, hopefully as close to April 1st as possible. In our last few minutes, taking a brief look at things on the national scale, which are always interesting. There was a recent scandal when I believe some documents were texted to a reporter.
It's the most outrageous thing. I haven't, for how long did we hear Republicans say, oh, what about Hillary's emails? What about her emails? So apparently, text messages went out to a group of people, like a group text, but for some reason it included a reporter from The Atlantic. And who was part of this text? It was the Vice President Vance. It was the Secretary of Defense Hegseth. The Secretary of State, I believe, Marco Rubio, the National Security, I don't remember what his title is, but Waltz, um, and others, and they were discussing the fact that the United States was going to launch an attack against the Houthis, which I have no problem with, by the way, in Yemen, and they were basically spreading it around in advance and really spreading out around information which should not have been public, and the incompetence of doing that because they had a wrong person on the text. And the fact that they were using this text system called Signal, which is not like high security, I think shows an amazing degree of incompetence. I mean, this is like the gang that couldn't shoot straight. And I'm sure they'll downplay it and poo-poo it, but believe me, if this were Hillary Clinton or anybody connected with Joe Biden, it would be the worst scandal in history. But because it's part of, the Trump administration, it's like, oh, another day, another scandal. People don't seem to react much to it. But in fact, it's a huge embarrassment. And the best thing you can say about it is that they're incompetent. And that's not something you want in the very top leadership. And then, of course, Trump, when asked about it by a reporter, said something like, I don't know anything. Which I suspect is true, unless this whole thing was deliberate for some reason, which would be a little hard to imagine. But you never know around here, because anything goes. Anything goes. So, yeah, it seems every day there's another horrible thing going on in this administration, and that's why a lot of people are getting very angry right now.
That has definitely been one of the issues we're discussing in the budget this year, is how the impacts of the federal government cutting spending are going to impact the state government and the funding for various things that are funded both by the state and federal governments.
Right, and it seems that some of the things that the federal government is doing is targeting Democratic-led states. They don't do things even-handedly, and then they're threatening to withhold funding if the New York doesn't cancel congestion pricing. Whether you're for congestion pricing or against it, you should be against what the federal government is doing, trying to strong-arm New York State by threatening to withhold funding, and that's what they're doing all over the place. And I guess there's a lesson to be learned: become more self-sufficient and don't rely on the federal government for anything. It's unfortunate, though, that New York taxpayers give so much to the federal government from their paychecks.
Well, as always, it's certainly going to be an interesting budget season. We look forward to seeing how that plays out over the next few weeks. And as always, we look forward to speaking with you next week.
Okay, well, thank you. Good to be here.